and click the Super Thanks button below. The Israeli army continues to divide the Gaza Strip in two and to carry out ground offensive operations in both areas. The ground offensive operations in the northern part of the Strip most recently blockaded Jabalia. In the south, the ground offensive has extended beyond Khan Yunis and has shattered Hamas terrorist defenses in the enclave. However, since Hamas has been focusing more on the south of the Gaza Strip in recent days, Israeli forces have created a much larger theater of operations in the north of Gaza. This allowed the IDF to resume its operations in Jabalia. There, a large number of Hamas terror members were neutralized, and dozens of terror camps were ransacked. Since Jabalia is one of Hamas's most important terror hotbeds, it is known that there are still many sympathizers in the city who supported the terror group. For this reason, the IDF continued its offensive against them today. Similarly, in Khan Yunis, a large number of Hamas terror sources were reportedly destroyed. In total, more than 450 Hamas targets have reportedly been destroyed in the last 24 hours as a result of Israeli strikes in all directions in the Gaza Strip. This striking number of casualties has increased the shakiness within Hamas and diminished the terrorist organization's faith in Hamas leaders and commanders. Hamas targets destroyed by the IDF included important terrorist settlements, observation posts, and weapons depots. With each passing day as the terror group fell back to Khan Yunis and lost many of its resources, the balance in the Strip shifted, and Hamas members found the solution in surrendering to the IDF. Most recently, as you may recall, more than 120 terror members surrendered to the IDF in Jabalia. This number has now reportedly risen to over 200. The IDF reported that the Hamas terrorist organization emerged from the buildings and tunnel lines in Jabalia, laid down their weapons, and surrendered to the Israeli army. With the addition of more than 80 more armed terrorists to the latest surrenders, the number of surrendered terrorists in Jabalia has now passed 200. The senior cadre of the Hamas terror group is very concerned about this situation. The emerging images of Yahya Sinwar, one of the key figures in Hamas, hiding in a tunnel in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza, are worrying the armed militant members of the terror group even more. As a result, they're losing hope that they can win this war and are surrendering to IDF forces. So the internal structure of Hamas is beginning to collapse. Therefore, the number of terror members surrendering to the IDF forces is expected to increase day by day. Hamas, on the other hand, is trying to carry out civilian attacks on Israeli settlements in order to instill morale and motivation in its terror members. To this end, the Hamas terrorist organization recently fired 4 rockets from Gaza at Dero. 2 of these rockets were destroyed by the Iron Dome air defense system. The others landed in open areas. No injuries or damage was reported. Hamas claimed to have fired rockets at Tel Aviv shortly after noon. Although no sirens were heard in the city center, the rockets appeared to have landed in the sea. Residents reported hearing large explosions. From this attempted attack, the Hamas terrorist organization fired another salvo, this time triggering sirens as the Iron Dome intercepted the incoming missiles. Shrapnel from the rocket fell on a parked car in the coastal city. Fortunately, no injuries were reported. In response to these terror attempts, the IDF announced that units of the 7th Armored Brigade directed a number of Israeli Air Force drones to attack Hamas terror members in the Khan Yunis area. Hundreds of Hamas terror members were neutralized as a result of this attack. Around the same time as these attacks, the Israeli Navy also carried out attacks in Gaza using guided munitions and artillery shells. The IDF reported that the Israeli Navy struck areas in central and southern Gaza belonging to the so-called naval forces of the Hamas terrorist organization. The IDF also reported that units of the 749th Reserve Battalion of the Combat Engineering Corps destroyed buildings containing Hamas infrastructure at Al-Azhar University in Gaza City. According to the IDF, soldiers of the 749th Reserve Battalion found a tunnel entrance leading to a school approximately 1 kilometer away from the university campus. Soldiers from this battalion found and destroyed explosive devices, rocket fragments, launchers, and other equipment in the area. These Israeli successes are unlikely to be enough for Hamas to convince its terrorist militants of the war going through civilian attacks. The numbers speak for themselves. Since the beginning of the war, the IDF has carried out nearly 14,000 airstrikes and destroyed more than 800 tunnel lines, shafts, and entry and exit points. In addition, IDF forces have confiscated nearly 8,000 weapons, missiles, grenades, and a large amount of military equipment. The killing of thousands of Hamas members, hundreds of terrorist commanders, and dozens of leaders of this group is another casualty that collapsed Hamas. In other words, after all this, Hamas lost its strength in the Gaza Strip and has retreated to the tunnel lines. In addition to these details, Hamas has suffered heavy losses again. The IDF reported that 40 more people were killed in attacks near Gaza City and dozens more in Jabalia and Khan Yunis. The people killed were reportedly found in areas close to cells of the Hamas terrorist organization. In other words, despite the large number of people who do not support Hamas, there are still those who support the terrorist organization. But as long as the IDF's ground offensives and air and naval attacks continue in a determined manner, the civilian population in the Gaza Strip that supports Hamas will realize that this will bring them nothing but death. But when that moment comes, it may be too late for those who support terrorism. In this difficult process, the IDF must make a very fine distinction between civilians and terror supporters in the Gaza Strip. The United States has also shared important assessments on this issue. In a phone call with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, U.S. President Joe Biden emphasized the critical need to protect civilians and separate the civilian population from Hamas, the White House said in a statement. Biden also called for corridors that allow people to move safely through certain areas of hostilities. Israel is actually doing critical work in this regard. In addition to Rafah, the Kerem Shalom border crossing is also planned for humanitarian aid trucks. This is critical for Palestinians in southern Gaza and Rafah. While Israel is carrying out such multifaceted activities in the Gaza Strip and in the areas close to Egypt, unfortunately, it has also received painful news in recent days. Most recently, the IDF announced that 2 reservists were killed while fighting in Gaza, bringing to 91 the number of soldiers killed in the ground offensive against Hamas since late October. Although the sainted martyrs of the Israeli army will never see the destruction of the Hamas terrorist organization in Gaza, their souls will surely feel Israel.